In this episode of Akram's Ideas, I'm going to share with you how to add a side seam pocket to any skirt pattern, so stay tuned! Hello and welcome. I'm Akram Birth, and you're watching Akram's Ideas, bringing creative and crazy ideas to life. In this episode of Akram's Ideas, I'm going to be sharing with you how to add a side seam pocket into any skirt pattern. To see more episodes like this, be sure to click the like button, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell icon to get notified of new videos. Now, this dress on the mannequin here may look familiar to many of you. This is the Ola dress from French Navy Patterns, which I recently did a sew-along video for. Now, this particular pattern does not call for pockets, but I actually added pockets to this dress, just like so. And I use the same method that I use for adding pockets into any skirt pattern, whether it's a dress or whether it's a standalone skirt. It's pretty easy and it doesn't take long to manipulate any pattern to work with a side seam pocket. So with that said, let's get started. Adding a side seam pocket to any skirt is really easy. All you need to start out with is a pocket pattern piece. And I'll actually provide a link in the description below to a free pocket pattern piece. But really all you need is a side seam pocket from any pattern that you have lying around. My favorite pocket to use actually is the Jennifer Lauren handmade Mayberry dress pocket because I really like the size and shape of this pocket. So the first thing you're going to do is go ahead and cut 4 of your pocket pieces. So I've cut 4 pieces of that pocket piece here, and I actually used some scrap fabric to do this. This is a great way of using up your scrap fabric and adding a little contrast hidden on the inside of your pocket. So I've got 4 pieces, 2 for each pocket. I also like to serge the outer edge of my pockets, but that's just a personal preference. You don't have to do that. I just like the way that it looks on the finished pocket. So those are the pocket pieces. Now all you have to do is take your skirt pieces. So I'm going to go ahead and start with my front skirt. And I'm actually working on the Ola dress, which is a free PDF pattern from French Navy Patterns. And this dress does not have any pockets, which is a shame because it screams for pockets. So we're going to add pockets to this. And the way to do this is that you need to make a couple of marks on your pattern piece. So on the right side of your fabric, you're basically going to come up to the waist seam and add a mark for where the seam allowance is. So the seam allowance on this pattern is 1 centimeter or 3/8 inch. So I'm just going to do a little marking there for that. And then from there, from your seam allowance, basically I have found, at least for me as far as pocket positions go, that 1 inch from the seam allowance is the perfect location to place your pocket. So what I do is I find my 1 inch right there, and that is where I'm going to place the pocket. And you're going to take one of your pocket pattern pieces and you're going to put the top edge at that mark, that 1 inch from the seam allowance mark. And you're going to pin it to your skirt right sides facing. You're going to do that to all of your side seams for your skirt. So here we are at our sewing machine, and like I said, we're going to take the pocket piece and stitch it to the skirt piece right sides together. And we're going to use a 3/8 inch seam allowance for this particular pattern, but typically you would use whatever seam allowance your skirt pattern has. And you're going to make sure you're at a 2.5 stitch length using a straight stitch centered. So I'm going to make sure that I'm in the right spot. And you're going to want to back stitch at the start and finish. So here you can see I've stitched my pocket piece onto the skirt using the same seam allowance. And now what we're going to do before we move on, I'm going to actually open up the pocket piece so that we can see it and make sure that the back seam between the skirt and the pocket piece is laying flat. We're just going to position our pocket seam line here right on the edge of our outer presser foot. And what we're going to do is we're going to pull the fabrics apart so that they have a nice taut line here. And we're going to top stitch on the pocket piece just right there where the seam is on the edge of your presser foot. So it's going to be about 1/4 inch away. So there you'll see that we have that stitched down, and all this does, this second top stitching, keeps your pocket from poking out once you've got the skirt assembled. So it keeps the pocket lining on the inside. Now that we have our pocket pieces attached to our skirt pieces, you're going to go ahead and finish any of the things that need to be done on your skirt pieces before you join the side seams. In our case, for this particular pattern, I had to create some gathered stitches. But after you've done all that, when you're ready to sew the side seams together, you're going to take your pattern pieces, so right sides together just like you normally would, and you're going to line up any of the notches between the two skirt pieces or any other markings. So I'm going to line up the two top pieces here, and of course the two bottom pieces down here. And what you're also going to want to do is line up the top edge of your pocket piece together. So the two pocket pieces. And you're going to line up the bottom piece of your pocket. And if there are any notches or markings on the pocket pieces, you're going to line those up so that the pocket pieces match up. So here is our skirt side seam all pinned along with the pocket. Now what you're going to do next, we're going to sew the skirt side seam, and you're going to use the seam allowance directed on your pattern. As you're sewing, you're going to come down 5/8 of an inch past where the top of your pocket started. From there, you're going to sew 5/8 of an inch all the way around for the seam allowance of the pocket. Then you're going to come back into the skirt and start sewing again at whatever seam allowance your pattern designates for the skirt, and you're going to do that for the rest of the side seam. Now we're going to sew our skirt side seams together, and you're going to sew your side seam at whatever your skirt pattern directs. So this particular pattern has a side seam of 3/8 of an inch. So I'm going to line that up, and I'm going to make sure that I'm at a 2.5 stitch length using a straight stitch. I'm going to back stitch at the start. So as I come down, I'm going to go up to the top of my pocket, and I'm going to find 5/8 inch down from that point. So from the top of my pocket, 5/8 inch is right about there, and I'm just going to mark it. I'll just mark it with a pin. And so from there, I'm going to continue sewing to the pin mark. And now I'm going to make sure my needle is down in the fabric, lift my presser foot, and pivot around here to sew the pocket pieces together at that 5/8 inch seam allowance. Now, as I come back towards the skirt, I'm just gonna come back and match up with the seam that is already stitched attaching the pocket to the skirt. So as you can see here, I'm gonna come back to that seam there, put my needle down in the fabric, lift up, put my presser foot back down, and continue sewing using that same seam allowance for the skirt pattern pieces. Now that you've sewn one side seam of your skirt, you're going to go over and repeat it for the other side. If we flip it around to the front here, we can see that we have our lovely contrasting pocket. And before we are done completely, you want to give your pocket piece and this whole side seam a nice pressing. I really love how the pockets on the Ola dress turned out, and I'm really glad that I added them in there. Just adding a side seam pocket to a dress makes it just so much more unique, so much more your own, and who doesn't love a dress with pockets? Now, like I said earlier, this method can be used for adding a side seam pocket into any dress or standalone skirt like I have here. So this is one of my mini Simplicity 8019 skirts that I've made, and I, with all of them, have added side seam pockets too. And again, I just love using scrap fabric to add a little bit of contrast to the pocket, and it also is a fun way to use some decorative fabric that you have left over from other projects. So I did the same thing in this skirt and pretty much all skirts that I make. Side seam pockets, like I said, work in any type of skirt pattern. I would say though that I find them to be a little bit more flattering when you have at least a little bit of an A-line or a fuller skirt. A pencil skirt or any kind of skirt that's really form-fitting, a side seam pocket's just going to add a little bit of bulk when the skirt's already form-fitting to your body. So you may not want to add them in those situations. But other than that, and this is a great method to use for adding those side seam pockets. If you've got any tips or tricks for adding pockets, I'd love to hear them in the comments below. As always, thanks for watching.
Which I recently did a sew along for. Now, let's start that over. Actually, the pocket for the pocket. I feel like I'm getting some really harsh light.